Good morning, everybody. I take this opportunity to welcome you to the very first meeting of the urologists of Uttar Pradesh. At the outset, my apology for not being able to present there in person and talk to you and meet with you. Nonetheless, I think I am virtually with you. Few disclaimers. I don't claim any originality of my thoughts in this presentation. They have been inspired by several prominent and spiritual people in the field, and they are a random collection of what I feel. See, biggest cause of unhappiness what I experience is we don't accept the things. We don't let them be what they are, nor we want them to let go. The memories haunt, brings in perpetual unhappiness. So the message is, if you cannot stop the wave, why not learn to surf? And here is a video clip which shows that in the most difficult circumstances, how a surfer overcomes and learns to swim with the wave. All is about happiness. You work for happiness, you have a family for happiness, you have friends, you have millions and trillions of things. The bottom line is happiness. The question which I ask is, what is needed to be happy? I may be wrong, you may have a different option, but I think it's a sense of achievement. I have created another problem for you by throwing another term and another question, that what brings the sense of achievement? Undoubtedly the answer is it is your passion. Again, interlinked question, how do one become passionate? Answer is no-brainer, by doing things which you would love to do. And here comes an equation. Passion added with grit makes you happy. Grit is not a simple term to understand. It cannot be explained with semantics. It's a term which you need to understand and internalize. And what's the outcome of why one should be passionate? As we know, our physical body, our physical world, including the enormous amount of innovation the human beings have done, has a limitation. Our body has a limitation, our thought process has limitation, our means have limitation. And this could not be better explained than the story of Frederick Calcule, who invented the ring of benzene. In turn, I wouldn't be wrong to say that he invented organic chemistry, and you need not be told what were the outcomes of inventing benzene ring and the organic chemistry.
The famous chemist Justus Liebig had just perfected the analytical methods needed to answer that question, but he contributed only indirectly to the discovery of the chemical formula of benzene. Liebig had been called as an expert witness in the hearing of a spectacular case of alleged suicide by burning. An architecture student, August Kekulé, gave evidence. Liebig's brilliant deductive thinking helped to prove a case of murder. Kekulé, impressed, decided to take up chemistry. He began his studies with Liebig in Gießen. later moving to Paris, London and Heidelberg, and finally settling in Ghent, where he was appointed Professor of Chemistry at the university. One of Kekulé's early works dealt with the theory that the atoms of the elements can each form a certain fixed number of bonds. Kekulé deduced that carbon had a binding capacity of 4, meaning carbon atoms could bind with 4 hydrogen atoms. Soon after that, Kekulé proposed that 2 carbon atoms could bind together. He thus established a set of rules by which models for many chemical experiments could be worked out on paper. Organic chemistry became more comprehensible and easier to apply. In 1862, Emil Erlenmeyer developed these rules further. He envisaged not only single but double and triple bonding between carbon atoms. This enabled chemists to describe the structure of many more molecules, but still no one could find a formula for benzene that satisfied all the laws of structural chemistry. Ghent, 1865. Kekulé was still a long way from solving the problem. For a moment, he fell asleep over his work. In a dream, he saw a snake biting its own tail. At least that's the story he told later. What could this dream mean? The key to the puzzle of the structure of benzene was the ring closure. Up until then, Kekulé had always envisaged molecules as linear. But why shouldn't a molecular snake also bite its own tail? 6 carbon atoms joined together by single bonds first form a chain. The chain closes to form a ring. Then come 6 hydrogen atoms and 3 double bonds, and the benzene molecule is complete. The discovery of the benzene ring gave a great boost to research into the chemistry of dyestuff.
If you look at this movie, it's very clear that when his physical efforts to invent the benzene ring, that how carbon and hydrogen molecules are stuck together, then the nature came. There are different stories. One story is shown here, that in his sleep he saw in his dreams that a snake biting his tail, and that gave him an answer. Yet another popular story about it is that he was so involved 24 hours trying to put together the structure of benzene ring. He had to face a divorce. And then one day he was fed up and threw all his books, lab books and papers, and he said, hell with the structure of benzene. He almost gave up. At that point in time, he could see a snake biting his own tail. Friends, don't be surprised. If you are really passionate about it, you connect to that unlimited source of energy. And there comes the answers which you cannot get by labor-intensive or physical work. Now here is a question that how do you define grit? And I was trying to look at dictionaries, different meanings of the excellence, my own definition of grit. But then nothing could describe it better for me than the movie Bhag Milkha Bhag. I'm sure most of you have seen this movie. You would recognize this clip. I know very little about the real life of Mr. Milkha Singh, but I do know that Farhan Akhtar has told us what is the grit through this movie clip.
बस बस हो गया बस 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 ओए क्यों छुपा रहा है तू उनके नाम दस्ते कौन सी एक बारी अपने मुंह ना ना दस्ते मैं उनकी लगता है कल सुबह हॉस्पिटल में शिफ्ट करना पड़ेगा सारी मेहनत मिट्टी हो गई बस बस
लेन नंबर 5 मिल्खा सिंह। लेन नंबर 5 मिल्खा सिंह।
जी सर।
आन
तेरे दी मिल गया। पागल हो गया है तू। जान दे, छड़ दे। तो नहीं होए।
मिल्खा मिल्खा बैठ Sit down. Sit. मेरी बात ध्यान से सुनो। और बहुत से मौके मिलेंगे, लेकिन इस हालत में भागोगे तो टांगे परमानेंट डैमेज हो सकती है। अंडरस्टूड? अरे गुरुदेव, तुम समझाओ इसे।
भाई सरदारा, वो जिद नहीं करते। जान दे।
की कर रहे हैं? पैर सूझ के कुप्पा है।
रहने दे सरदारा, जान दे। छड़ छड़ दौड़ने दो ना गुरुजी। आपको तो पता ही है।
On your marks. Set.
मिल गया। ओए तू ठीक है? ओए तू ठीक है? ओए शाबाशी ओए, ठीक है ना? ओए मिल गया।
मिल्खा, तुमने नेशनल रिकॉर्ड तोड़ दिया। हाँ गुरुदेव।
सुनी? ओए पागला। सरदारा, मिल गया तू। नेशनल रिकॉर्ड तोड़ता। रिकॉर्ड तोड़ दिया। गुरुजी। मिल्खा बन गया।
As you know the stories, despite serious injuries, Milkha Singh not only qualified Asian Games in 1958, but broke national record in 200 meters and 400 meters. So how do you define grit after this? Grit is an uncompromising commitment with the self. One thing I would like to clearly tell you that my entire discussion today is about you as an individual, a DNA, is not to a congregation. Whatever we are talking is applicable to you. Other is not in the picture. And once we talk of grit, grit means that we are trying to make a commitment to ourselves, not to get external recognition, fully realizing the difficulties we are going to encounter, fully realizing the success is not round the corner. But that sense of determination which you see in this movie is grit. Another example of grit, in other words, you can say diligence, hard work. And we have lots of myths about the chess grandmaster. Bobby Fischer is one of the examples. Everybody said he's a child prodigy, which was not true to a great extent. Yes, there could be a contribution of his genetic factors, but the main thing was, as his teacher quoted and shown in this movie, Bobby Fischer had 250,000 moves of chess before his opponent could move and was ready to counter that move. This is sheer hard work. So it's a good news for those who are not very good students. Everybody can achieve everything. It's not your intelligence. It's not your IQ. We talk of IQ simply because we don't have a better tool to measure one's capability. But truly, it is the grit. It's all a doable component of life. You know the story of 10,000 hours? This is writing of Ravi Shankar, who doesn't know. There are thousands and thousands of sitar maestros. Why Ravi Shankar was different? Have you asked this question to yourself? Simply because every sitar maestro statistically has to play 8 to 10 hours a day. But Ravi Shankar logged in extra 10,000 hours of practice to be what he was. This study shows very adequately what I'm meaning to say. After repeating what we do, maybe it's urological procedures or surgical procedures, we reach to everyday skills. We are able to do things reasonably well. And then most of us get into a phase, you do more, learn more, to a level of arrested development. But it is this extra practice of deliberate practice which puts you into the top echelon of 5% of the people who are exceptionally brilliant in performing their job. Each and every problem they deal as an individual. Here is another example. The US Airways flight 1549 on January 15, 2009 landed safely in Hudson River, saving lives of 155 passengers within 6 minutes of taking off from LaGuardia Airport in the New York City. Both the engines failed within 3 minutes of taking off. I am sure you have heard of this incident because this made international news and a popular international news. See what the commandant, Captain Chelsea Sullenberger, had to say about this.
First responders in New York City expected the worst. An Airbus A320 with 155 people on board down in the middle of the frigid Hudson River. Only 5 minutes earlier, Captain Sullenberger had taken off from LaGuardia Airport on a routine flight bound for Charlotte, North Carolina.
Cactus 1549, 700, climbing 5,000.
It was a normal climb out in every regard, and about 90 seconds after takeoff, I noticed there were birds filling the entire windscreen, from top to bottom, left to right, large birds, too close to avoid.
When did you realize these birds had hit the plane?
Oh, you could hear them as soon as they did, loud thumps. It felt like the airplane being pelted by heavy rain or hail. It sounded like the worst thunderstorm I'd ever heard growing up in Texas. It was obvious to me from the very moment that we lost the thrust that this was a critical situation, losing thrust on both engines at a low speed, at a low altitude over one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. Yes, I knew it was a very challenging situation. I knew I had to solve this problem. I knew I had to find a way out of this box I found myself in. The only viable alternative, the only level, smooth place sufficiently large to land an airliner was the river. My focus at that point was so intensely on the landing.
You couldn't think of anything else.
I thought of nothing else.
There were just 3.5 minutes for Captain Sullenberger to accomplish what only a few commercial airline pilots had ever done, and he was determined to avoid the fate of this Ethiopian airliner, which landed in the Indian Ocean in 1996 and broke into pieces, killing most of the passengers on board.
That's what I was trying to avoid.
What were some of the things you had to do to make this landing successful?
I needed to touch down with the wings exactly level. I needed to touch down with the nose slightly up. I needed to touch down at a descent rate that was survivable. And I needed to touch down just above our minimum flying speed, but not below it. And I needed to make all these things happen simultaneously. I think in many ways, as it turned out, my entire life up to that moment had been a preparation to handle that particular moment.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? Cactus 1549, radar contact is lost.
Flight 1549 approached the waterline and then landed in the river.
Hitting the water is hard. It was a hard landing. And then we scooted along the surface for some point, and then at some point the nose finally did come down as the speed decreased, and then we turned slightly to the left and stopped.
When you landed, you and the first officer looked at each other.
And we said, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought. And then we quickly began doing our duties. He was running the evacuation checklist while I opened the door and commanded evacuate.
Did you give yourself even a few seconds, though, to acknowledge that you had averted disaster?
No, because I hadn't quite yet. And I had business to attend to. I had a job to do.
Another problem is when we look for something, like if you lose something, your telephone or something, and keep looking at the places you have not left it, it leads to unhappiness. Same thing is about the perfection. Most of the time we look at perfection in others, get into that rat race competitive mode, it leads to unhappiness. If you really want to better your own performance rather than comparing yourself with others. God has not made us to match each other. We are what we are, and we should try and stay what we are. We have some exceptional qualities which others don't have, and that's what we need to nurture. Last but not the least, as we go up the ladder in the career, in the age, one of the most crucial thing is the humility. And I know in the audience there are lots of teachers, and teachers need to learn it the most because their students are bound to excel them, and they need to accept that fact, and they need to do everything possible to ensure that their students reach to the heights they have never been, but they know such heights exist.
मैं आश्रम छोड़कर जाना चाहता हूँ। आप जैसा गुरु पाकर मैं धन्य हूं। आपने एक बार भी नहीं पूछा कि मैं ऐसा क्यों कह रहा हूं।
ध्यान के साथ सोपान की विद्या और उसका अनुभव मुझे था, जो मैंने तुम्हें सौंप दिया। तुम्हारे जैसी उज्जवल आत्मा को और आगे जाना है। ध्यान समाधि के 8वें सोपान तक तुम्हें पहुंचना है, और संभवतः उससे भी कहीं आगे।
गुरुवर्य, अब आप ही मेरी दिशा निर्देश कीजिए कि ध्यान समाधि के 8वें सोपान का ज्ञान मुझे कौन दे सकता है।
उसके लिए तुम्हें मगध जाना होगा। वहां आदरणीय मुनि उदाका रामापुत्ता तुम्हारे आगे के आध्यात्मिक मार्ग में सहायक बने।
गुरुवर्य, यदि मैं अपना मार्ग खोजने में सफल रहा तो आपको आकर अवश्य बताऊंगा।
मुझे इसकी प्रतीक्षा रहेगी। यदि इस वृद्धावस्था ने अवसर दिया तो।
ये आप क्या कर रहे हैं गुरुवर?
तुम भी उनके चरणों की धूल अपने माथे पे लगा लो। कदाचित ये अवसर फिर कभी मिले ना मिले। वो देखो, युग पुरुष चला जा रहा है। युग युगांतर के पश्चात ऐसा युग पुरुष धरती पर अवतरित होता है, और धरती पावन धन्य हो जाती है।
At the end, I would say that we may not be able to do great things, but we could do small things with great love. Wishing you a great conference and look forward to see you soon. Thank you very much.